Get your stuff all turned in by next Tuesday. But our last class session is on Friday. I'm looking at page 316, question number 380. Do you recommend premarital counseling for engaged couples? Would you recommend engaged couples have some premarital counseling? You go, why? We're in love. We're going to get married. We don't have any problems. Well, the counseling isn't because they have a problem. The counseling is to head off any potential problems. On page 20, he shows a list of questions that a competent counselor would help the couple address together. Where will you live after you get married? You go, what? Where are you going to live? Now if you say, oh, I'm thinking we were going to live with my parents, your spouse might not think that's a good idea, or your potential spouse. So once you guys get married, you met here in college, okay, you're both going to school. Are both of you going to keep going to school? And are both of you going to keep working part-time? Or is one of you going to work full-time while the other one works part-time and goes to school so you can pay the bills? Well, we thought we'd keep working part-time and just keep doing what we're doing. Are your parents going to keep paying the bills for you after you get married? Are children planned? Have you thought about how many children you want to have? How soon you want to have children and how far apart you want children to be? Will the wife go back to work after having babies, and how quickly? How will the kids be disciplined? What church will you attend? Are there theological differences to be reckoned with? How will your roles be different? What do you mean, how will your roles be different? Well, now that you're dating, you're just in love. But when you get married, what does a wife expect of her husband, and what does the husband expect of his wife? And what do you see the wife's role to be? And that should be asked of both the man and the woman. And what do you see the husband's role to be? And that question should be answered by both the man and the woman. My wife and I, it just happened, the pastor who married us didn't do a lot of premarital counseling stuff. So basically when we got married, we had to start buying books and do this on our own. And I don't know if it was any kind of tragedy. We figured it out eventually, but it helps, and I agree with Dobson. It helps to have some premarital counseling before you step into this. What are we going to do about finances? I'm laughing about that one because when we first got married, we moved into an empty apartment, and my wife said, so what are we going to do for furniture? And I said, well, I guess we'll go to the furniture store and just buy some and put it on a credit card. She goes, oh no, I don't think we better do that. My dad always paid cash for everything. And I laughed and I said, really? I grew up on a farm. My dad borrowed money for everything we did. And he did. It's just that we'd have a bumper wheat crop, and my mom would say, well, Bo, it looks like we've got the bills all paid off. He said, that figures, it's about time for a new tractor. And he'd go out and buy a new tractor and have payments that had to be made till we had another bumper wheat crop to pay it off. And it was just, I just saw that happen all the time. So can you see, I brought one dimension to the marriage, she brought another, and we had to talk through that kind of thing. Will you buy a car with borrowed money, or will you buy an old clunker that you can pay cash for? My theory is that if I buy an old clunker, I need to buy two of them So when one of them breaks down, I've got another one to drive. And if I buy a new car, I better ask myself, can I afford to make the payments? Got you, Michael. Anybody else come in that I missed? Okay. If I don't say your name, be sure and let me know. Page 395. Question 395. On page 327. I've talked to my husband about how I'm different from him and how I need him to be sensitive to my needs. That could also be an engaged couple. Somehow he just doesn't hear what I'm saying. I've also gotten mad at him about 100 times. How can I get my feelings across to him? And Dr. Dobson says, you need to read a book written by Gary Smalley and John Trent on the languages of love. Have any of you read those languages of love and figured out which love language you use the most often? And then find out what kind of love language your if you're going to show love to your family, what kind of love language your mother prefers, your father prefers, and tune into those different love languages in terms of expressing your love to one another and in terms of understanding one another. So read some of those books. And he tells a neat little story there about how one of those men who wrote those books, the wife shared a little story that made a lasting impact on him that he put in his book, which I think was nice of him to do that. Question 398 on page 329. In recent months, there have been 2 occasions when a woman at work made a pass at me. I love my wife deeply. I have no interest in this lady, and I've communicated this to her in no uncertain terms. Do you think I should share this incident with my wife? And Dr. Dobson says, yes, I do. First, because I believe the healthiest marriages are those that are open and honest on such matters. And second, because sharing important information is a step toward accountability in a situation that could prove dangerous. And third, because your wife should be your best friend with whom you discuss troubling circumstances and how they will be handled. And then he talks about, I urge you to continue to reject the advances of the lady at your office, regardless of how attractive she is or how flattering her interest in you may be. To pursue her may give your ego a ride, but only pain and sorrow lie down that road for her and for you. And you've heard me say before, if you suspect that's happening, when you're a married person, just every time you engage that person in a conversation, talk about your spouse. Just talk about your spouse, and it'll throw cold water on any kind of interest in a relationship. In fact, can you see where if a lady's making a pass at a guy at work and he goes, you know, you ought to meet my wife. She's a marvelous person. You guys might have some things in common. Because if she's really interested in you, who's the last person on this earth she wants to see? Is your wife. And so you say, maybe I'll have her come into work someday and you can meet her and see what a wonderful person she is. It just lets them know that you're not interested, no matter what they say or what they might do. And I suppose, based on my reading of Proverbs, there are women out there who are not happy campers. Somebody messed their life up, and so they've made it their purpose in life to find men that they can mess their lives up. Now, my wife says that's kind of a sinister outlook on it, but I said, well, if you read Proverbs, it sure says a lot about watching out for women who are just out to mess up men's lives. So guys, just be careful about that. And girls, I'll just say it to you, what I used to say to my daughters. There's a whole bunch of boys in this world that haven't grown up yet, and their only interest is in what they want, and they don't care about anybody else, and they'll say or do anything to get what they want. And then I said, and then as they got older, I said, look at some of your friends. they thought this guy was in love with her, and what? Now she's pregnant and they don't want a thing to do with it. What does that tell you about these turkeys, these little dogs that run around just looking to entertain themselves? Question 390, no, question 405. Oh, we're over to question 405. Oh, talking about money. Do you think it's wrong to be unusually wealthy? Does the Bible say anything about wealth? Does the Bible say anything about money? And Dr. Dobson says, wealth is not evil in itself. What is it? It's the love of money. The Apostle Paul clarified for us that money is not the problem. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil, not the money itself. We get into trouble when our possessions become a god to us. Let's see. When you were younger and your parents taught you to give part of your money that you earned from babysitting or from doing odd jobs to church, you probably started out saying, okay, here's my 10th of what I earned, I'll give it to church, and then the rest I'll just spend it as I please. And then somewhere along the line someone might have taught you that, well, maybe you ought to save some of it and spend some of it and give some of it to church. And I don't know what you've been taught about finances, but I tell you what can happen, that as you get down the road, just like years ago, people basically lived from what? They earned money, they spent it on their family. Well, they earned money, they gave their tithe to church, and then they spent the rest on taking care of their families. And then our culture changed to where, and if they had, well, what my grandparents saved some money in fruit jars and buried it so nobody could find it. My parents, I think they encouraged us to open up savings accounts in the bank. So we had we'd earn money, we'd put some in the bank. And I think now a lot of people are encouraged that you want to save some, but then you want to invest some for your retirement. And I really think that that's a good idea, but also what I see happening is some people start thinking about, you know, if I took if all this money I'm putting in church, I was also investing, look how bigger my nest egg would be when it comes time to retire. And they start to be tempted to chip away, in other words, to take money away from one thing to put it someplace else. And I would say before you entertain notions like that, read those scriptures where the Bible talks about stewardship and where he talks in the Old Testament about people robbing God and not doing the right thing in terms of giving him the first fruits of your labors and then living on the rest of it and seeing what happens down the road. Question 406 says, do you think it's unbiblical to earn a high salary? I suppose you could say own an expensive home or have a nice car and acquire a savings account? And Dr. Dobson again says, certainly not. But if your high salary, when I was a student here at school, one of my professors, I still remember him standing in class and saying this. He said, I want to say something to you guys. And it was in homiletics class where we're learning how to preach. He said, some of you, while you're here studying to be preachers, are going to get good paying jobs. And when you graduate, the job you have is going to pay you such an exorbitant salary that when you go to a church to preach and you find out what they're going to pay their preacher, you will pass up the opportunity to preach. You'll forget about your calling into ministry and stick with the job because it pays so much. And I remember hearing him say that, and I thought, I don't think there's anybody in this room that would do that. And by the time I graduated, wouldn't you know, I had this very well-paying job. And what happened? When I was offered a job in ministry, it was 1/3 of what I made in the business world. Now that's a substantial cut for salary, and it's just like, wait a minute, that guy just said that some people will walk away from it, and I sat in class and said that's not going to happen to me. And I just said, you know what? I just have to trust God here to take care of this. The high salary's just going to have to go. I enjoyed it while I had it, but now that it's gone, I'll do something else. And what kind of home will I live in? If you're pastoring a church, it might be a parsonage that they provide that isn't to your liking. Well, that's just life. And have a nice car. Oh, I've ridden in some cars that feel like you're driving your living room couch down the road. Have any of you ridden in a car like that? And the reason I say that is, what kind of cars do I drive? Those little cheapies. I buy the little ones that when a semi-trailer passes you, it shakes on the road. It's not a big car. And it's just like, so that's what I'm used to driving. And I think what started me doing that was when Germany started shipping Volkswagens to America. And you could buy a brand new Volkswagen for like $1,700. Now, who ever heard of buying a brand new car for under $2,000? I'm going to go buy one of those things. And all my friends said, oh, it's like it's got a rubber band instead of a radiator, because it was an air-cooled engine, and they made fun of it. But it was economical, and it was a small little car. And so I got used to driving small cars and thought, you know, this is just an economical way to travel. But then you get in some big car and say, this is nice, I'd like to have one of these. Then I go look at the price tag, and I'm going, whoa, I could buy 3 of those little cars for the price of one of these big ones. Now, if you can afford it and your salary supports it, I say fine, go ahead and do it. That's between you and God. But for me, I have to learn to minimize a lot of things. And someone asked me one time, early in our marriage, when we had young children at home, and they said, so do you have a savings account? And I said, not very much of one. And they said, well, you know what Larry Burkett says in his book? And I said, you know what? If I wrote a book like Larry Burkett did and had all the revenue coming in from publishing that book, I'd probably have enough money to put a pretty substantial amount in a savings account too. But I just don't have that much to spare on my salary. By the time I get through making my church donation and paying my school tuition for my children and buying groceries and paying the bills, there's pretty much not very much left to go into the savings account. I mean, when there was a little bit for some kind of an emergency, I would put it there, but it sure wasn't going to be like the percentages mentioned in the financial managers books. But I just didn't have the resources, so I said I'll just have to learn to live with what I have and watch God take care of things. And I think you just have to do that. Fortunately for me, I'm a hyperactive individual. So when it came time to go to graduate school and get a graduate degree, and I had to pay for it, I just got a part-time job, earning the extra money that I needed to pay my tuition, and it worked out okay. Question 407, what's the biblical approach to possessions and money? And the first principle is God owns it all. It all belongs to Him, so I'm just a steward of what He's given me. The second principle I think is very important too. There's also a trade-off between time and effort and money and rewards. If you work someplace where you make a large salary, they usually expect a lot of you and you don't have much time off. It's kind of interesting. If you make a small salary, you have time to do things but no money to pay for it. If you have a large salary, you often have money to do things but no time to do it. So it's a real trade-off in life to figure that stuff out. When our daughters were younger, they had lots of friends who took vacations in the summer. And they would say, where are we going on vacation this summer, Dad? And I would say, well, actually, it depends on which camps call us to be a speaker for a week. And they finally figured out that where we go on vacation is when some camp would call me and say, like some of the kids in our school, they would go to a church where they went to church camp and they would talk about their Bible teacher at school. And so the camp would call and say, hey, can you come for a week at camp and speak to our camp? And I'd say, sure, I can do that. And then I would go in and schedule to speak at their camp, and basically that's where we went on vacation. I said, we have 2 children, can they come to camp free? They say yes. So we went to vacation by me speaking at camps around the country. Page 339 also says Principle 3, there's no such thing as an independent financial decision. When I decide to spend money on A, then that means there's no money to spend on B, C, D, or E. You just have to weigh the thing out and say, so what's going to happen here? If we decide at Christmas time that I don't want my wife cooking all that dinner, and I just go to Hy-Vee and buy, or Walmart and buy the big box dinner that costs a bunch of money that's already fixed for you, then there won't be as much money for Christmas presents for the grandchildren. You follow that? You say you spend money here, you can't spend it someplace else. So you just simply say there's no such thing as an independent. Every financial decision you ask, what are the implications for other things we might be doing, or what will we not be doing because we're spending this money here? And the 4th principle is probably the one that you want to teach children early on in life. Delayed gratification is the key to financial maturity. I still remember the day one of my daughters said to me when she was little, Dad, I saw a bicycle the other day at the mall that I would love to have. And I said, what's wrong with the bicycle you already have? She goes, nothing. I would just love to have one of those. And it was a bicycle that cost about $100 back then. And I said, you know what, girl? If you want that $100 bicycle, you just need to start saving your money. And then when you get $100, we'll go up to the store and you can spend your $100 to buy it. And bless her heart, she started saving all of her money. And sure enough, she had $100 in her little savings account. I said, well, you want to go buy that bicycle? And here's what she said. I'll never forget. She said, you know, I've worked awful hard to get this $100. I'm thinking that the bicycle I already have is good enough for now. I think I'll wait a while. In other words, she had worked so hard for the money, she wasn't sure she wanted to spend it all on one little bicycle. And to me, that's the benefit of delayed gratification. You postpone getting, you say, I just have to have this. I just need this so bad. And then it's like, maybe not as bad as you think you do. Wait a little while. One of the ways I promote delayed gratification in my life is my sister says I have a shopping problem. And I said to my sister, well, when you came along in our family, things were better off financially than when I was born. When I was born, things were kind of tight. We didn't have much. And even to the point to where us boys worked in the summer to earn money to buy our own school clothes. So can you understand I tell people, when you kind of grow up poor, you tend to want to buy things. That's just happens, and that's kind of part of human nature. So the way I handle delayed gratification in my own life is, if I really see something I want, I say, wow, did you see those new wrenches that are ratchet-like wrenches? Those are so cool. And it's like, yes. And if I really want one of those, then I should wait for it to go on sale. Got you, Karis. I should wait for that to go on sale and then buy it. So, you understand, Menards is one of my favorite places to shop, because I wait till if I think I need a set of tools, I wait till that set of tools has a big rebate on it, and then I go buy it and use the rebate to buy other stuff that I need to fix my house. And on page 340, no amount of income will be sufficient if spending is not brought under control. Somewhere you have to simply put a lid on your tendency to spend money. And you know why. Do you know why all the companies out there, why when you're in college, you get letters offering you credit cards? And I'll be the first to say, in this day and age, having a credit card to pay for gas at the pump is so much more convenient and even so much safer than walking into the gas station and going that distance. Just get out and put your card in there. But check this out. The next time you buy gas, when I used to pay cash out of my pocket for gas, I knew exactly how much I paid for that tank of gas, and I would remember that while I'm driving to think about how much gas I'm burning. When I use a plastic card to buy gas, I pull into the gas station, I put the card in, I fill up, and when I leave, I don't remember how much I paid for that tank of gas. And I'm not as conscientious about driving around and burning gas, simply because, and the people who issue plastic cards know this, that with plastic cards, we will spend more than we would otherwise. And they just know that. So that's why they issue the cards. And one time, I had a card in my life sent to me by a company that I just had a weakness for buying things from them. And finally I realized the only way I'm going to get a handle on this card is to cut this card up and throw it away. And I read that in a book somewhere, that some credit cards are just not healthy to have. It's just, there's too much of a temptation to buy things with that card. It's just like, yep, that's what this card is all about, so I'll just cut it up and just quit using that card. And find a different card to use if I have an emergency. And if I carry a credit card in case I have an emergency, then why not carry a little bit of money in my pocket too in case I have an emergency, so I don't have to use a credit card all the time. Let's see, question 408 on page 341. Is the traditional family a thing of the past? Dr. Dobson says, well, this person said, I hear that it's no longer viable and that we ought to begin thinking about what's going to replace the traditional family. And Dr. Dobson says, we've certainly heard that perspective often enough from the media and from influential people. And then he talks about some influential people who have talked about the demise of the traditional family. Have you heard anybody talk about the traditional family is just a thing of the past? And Dobson's point is that it's not, it's almost like what happened in the Old Testament. This prophet says, I'm the only one here who's serving you. And God says, I have lots of people who are serving me that you're not aware of. And I think it's the same thing with the traditional family. There are a lot more traditional families than people let on, that people talk about. And some of the people who are quoting statistics, Dr. Dobson shows here in this section, they misquote the statistics. They say things that just aren't accurate. And basically, Dr. Dobson says, for the past 3 decades, we've been hearing about the family's imminent demise from politicians, from radical feminists, from homosexual activists, and liberal journalists. Now, this book was written 20 years ago. So if that's what you were hearing 20 years ago for the past 30 years, so what's happening today? In the 20 years since he wrote this book, do we still have people talking about the imminent demise of the family? Politicians and radical people and liberals? And it's just like, hey, it hasn't changed. Has everybody bought into the notion yet? It's like, no. We're still looking at the Bible and saying this is what God intended for a family, a husband and a wife to stay together till death do they part, and children to be brought up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So we have to say, it doesn't matter what the world around us says, we're just going to keep doing the right thing from God's perspective and keep promoting. But it's obvious that the world has made inroads into the Christian community, because years ago when Christian schools were getting started in this country, back in the 70s, the 1970s, there would be very few children from broken homes in the classroom. And I think today, if you go to any Christian school and ask what percentage of the students in your school come from broken homes, you would hear a percentage number that would be rather shocking. So what that tells us is that the world has made inroads into the thinking of Christians in America. We've allowed them to squeeze us into their mold or put us into their box or drag us down to their level of living. And if you're going to live in accordance with God's Word, you're going to raise the bar and you're going to live differently than other people do. And even when our children were teenagers and we talked to them about how God expects us to live in this world, we had Christian friends who said to us, you people are so strict. They would say, they said, I just want to give you some advice, Tom. I think you and Nina are too strict with your daughters. And I just am afraid that someday they're going to grow up to resent what you've done to them. I said, well, pray for us that we'll see the light and do it the right way. But I just have to ask God for wisdom, and I look at God's Word for what to do, and then I operate accordingly. And if I don't do what God says to do and things don't turn out right, I'd expect that. If I do what God says to do and it doesn't turn out right, I leave that up to Him. And the end result is that some of these people who said we were being too strict, have too high a bar for our children, and they lowered the bar to let their children feel a little more comfortable in the world. Now, here we are, old people, and what happens when we get together? Our kids are doing fine, and their children are having problems. So the very people who said to us, you better be careful. You're going to have problems with your kids in the future. It just hasn't turned out that way. And they're the ones having problems. I have one old friend of mine. I mean, when you're old, you refer to your friends as old. That's what we are. I have one old friend of mine said to me one time, he said, Tom, how come my kids never come to visit me on holidays? I said, oh, that's easy. Remember when your kids were little? And you remember what you said to me when we would pack our kids up in the car and go see my wife's parents and see my parents every Christmas and every 4th of July? You remember what you used to say to us? And he said, what? I said, here's what you said. When are you going to take a vacation for yourselves and not just focus on your family? He said, we never do that. When it comes time for a holiday and my vacation days at work, we go take family vacations, and we go to where? Disney World and Disneyland, and we fly overseas here and go there and do other things. And I said, well, I figure someday my parents won't be here and my wife's parents won't be here, and we'll have plenty of time to do that stuff then. But while our parents are here, I want to follow the injunction from Scripture that says, honor your parents. He said, you're missing out on a lot of good times. Yeah, you know what else I missed out on? Okay, now what happened? What does his kids grow up seeing? Did his kids grow up going to see their grandparents? No. So do they bring their children to see the grandparents? No. They do the same thing he did. They plan elaborate vacations and run all around the world. And he can't figure out why that's happening. And it's the principle in Scripture is you reap what you sow. So guess what happens at our house? Everybody wants to get together and see the grandparents for Christmas and holidays, simply because you set that tone in the family as you're raising kids. So just remember, there's a whole lot of people that would love to destroy the family unit. And I really think, here again, as I said earlier, about those people in Proverbs who are disgusted with their way of life and they want to ruin everybody else's. There are people who would love to see intact families torn apart just because they want everybody else to be as miserable as they are. Okay, question 4. 12. No, let's go to question 421. I need to cover a little more material today. When my wife left me for another man, I felt like the whole thing was my fault. Well, maybe it was. I said that to a guy one time, and he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, what were some things you could have been doing that you weren't doing to be more sensitive to your wife's needs?" He goes, "Yeah, I see what you're talking about." But Dobson says on page 353, the blame for marital disintegration is seldom the fault of the husband or the wife. It takes two to make it work, and guess what? It usually takes two to break it up as well. So there's no one person to blame. It's just that both people carry some of the weight. And it probably is good to feel bad and apologize. But as my older brother said one time, after he left his wife, he said, "The worst mistake I ever made in my life was leaving my wife." He waited, because of the tradition in our neighborhood, he waited till after his kids were grown and married before he packed up and left. But he left. And he said one time, "The worst decision I ever made was when I left your mother, or when I left my wife." And he was telling his kids this, and he said, "But there's nothing I can do to fix it now. I can't undo what I did," because of his own personal entanglements and because she wasn't willing to take him back. And it's just like, wow. And on page 354, number 422, my wife tried to make me feel guilty when she left. Do people who are doing the wrong thing like to shift the guilt and the blame to somebody else? Just understand, that just happens. That just happens. People who are doing something that's inappropriate, rather than just admit that I'm doing something that's wrong, they will try to blame somebody else for what's going on. And you just have to say, that's human nature, and I'm going to have to just deal with that in terms of how I'm going to relate to people around me. I'm going to be as loving as I can be and as giving as I can be. But if things go wrong, they might even blame you for being too loving and too giving. What can you say? It's just human nature. Question 439 is the next one I have circled here. Page 363. I noticed that you rarely recommend to unhappy and angry spouses that they seek a divorce and get on with their lives. I disagree, this person says. My husband and I were always incompatible and should never have married in the first place. Why do you consider divorce to be a last resort? And here's what Dr. Dobson says. Divorce and its aftermath are difficult for both partners and rarely deliver on the promise of a quick fix. It's usually far more painful than advertised. Everyone loses when a marriage turns sour, especially the children. Surprisingly, the grandparents struggle too. I read recently that the parents of divorcing children typically suffer as much as their warring sons and daughters. In-laws can do nothing but stand and watch as two people they love begin clawing one another to pieces, leaving wounded grandchildren in their wake. Certainly there is no winner when a marriage begins to unravel. And Dr. Dobson says, that's why I say, if at all possible, keep it together. And if it falls apart, if it's broken apart, if it's not working, then later, when you come to your senses, can God put your life back together? Yes, He can. But if you have an occasion to help somebody avoid it up front, then do what you can to help them. Question 451. Whoa, that's way over in the next chapter. Good, we're making progress since we only have one more day. Page 451. Great marriage killers. Now, see, you almost think you ought to be saving that for a class for all the married students on campus. Get all the married people together and say, hey, I need to talk with all of you about the great marriage killers. Can you see how the married couples on campus could get together and take this book and just look at these things and walk through here and talk about it? And Dr. Dobson was asked on page 375, would you identify some of the great major marriage killers that are most responsible for the high divorce rate that plagues today's families? Can you see what's happening? If we can look at what are the things that are killing marriages, then maybe as married couples, we can avoid some of that stuff. And the first one he mentions on page 375 is overcommitment. Can you see where, in fact, one time my wife said to me, when our children were younger, she said, Tom, she said, sometimes, some weeks you are so busy ministering to other people that you don't have time for your own children. I would just get a call from someone and say, I'd be going to school events after school, working with teenagers, and then on nights when I didn't have some school event to go to, I'd have people call and say, can you come and meet with our youth group and talk to our young people? And can you see, I had people calling me, and I said, and she said, you could spend your life helping other people's children and lose your own. And I'm going, whoa, that's a bad idea. And I said, I need to do something about that to safeguard my time with my family and not get overcommitted. And that's when I started using a little calendar that fits in my pocket. I have a whole drawer full of them at home that I could go back and look at the history of my life, where it's just a little book that you open up, and it has a week at a glance is what it was called. Has about 5 lines for each week or each day of the week. And I would write in that book what I had to do each day. And then I would say to my daughters, okay, what do we need to put on my calendar next week so I won't get booked doing something else? And I would put in all the ball games where they were either playing ball or being cheerleaders and any after school activities they had, and was there something they wanted to do. And when we first moved to Kansas City, we had a garage sale in Peoria before we moved down here, and they made some money when we got here. Most of their friends at church on Saturdays, their parents gave them a few bucks and dropped them off at the mall, at what used to be Bannister Mall, and just let them run around all day in the mall. And I went down there one day and checked out this mall and concluded that this was not the best choice for adolescents or pre-adolescents. So I said, girls, you made some money selling stuff in Peoria before we came here. So how about you use your money to go buy a season pass to Worlds of Fun? And then we'll just go up there every Saturday. And I still remember standing in line with my daughters at Worlds of Fun with a little backpack and books in it. And I would pull books out and read what I was going to be teaching that next semester here at Calvary. And sometimes when I was giving a lecture in class, I would start to smile, and I would think, oh, I was working on this lecture while I was standing in line for the Zambezi Zinger, or when I was waiting in line at the log flume. And it just was kind of humorous to me that I had done that. But it was just, we had passes, and that's what we did. And I said, hey, you can invite your friends if you want to come along with us, because we had a station wagon. So I would be glad to load up your friends and bring them. And guess what some of their parents said? No, we give them about $5 and let them go down to the mall and hang out all day. To give them $12 to go to Worlds of Fun would be too expensive. And I thought, yep, they're saving money and damaging their children. I mean, that's just the way I thought. The mall was not a healthy place for their kids to be hanging out. But they did it because it was the cheapest way to go. And that's when I concluded that if you really want to do the best thing for your kids, it's going to mean that you're going to spend money that you'll spend more than if you just do the less than best thing for them. And one of the things I had to do was simply say, I've got a calendar, I put your events in it, and then when someone calls and says, can you speak to our young people on this night? I can, oh, I'm sorry, I'm already booked for that night. And one guy actually said one time to me, he said, so what are you doing on a Thursday night? I said, well, it says I'm taking my daughter to a basketball game. He said, does she play basketball? I said, no, she's just a spectator. I'm just going there to sit with her. Oh, he said, well, couldn't your wife go with her? And then you come and speak to our youth group? I said, no, but could you reschedule your youth group for a time when I have an opening in my calendar? He said, well, no, we can't do that either. So he tried to talk me out of following my calendar and making my family a priority. And then when he couldn't talk me out of it, guess what he said? You know, Tom, I really admire you for taking that stand. I said, yeah, thanks. You admire me and you try to make me feel guilty. You understand? You just have to really stick by your guns and say, look, this is my calendar. This is how I schedule things. And I'm going to have to turn down some things I could do because my family's a higher priority, both my wife and my children. And the second killer is excessive credit and conflicts over how money will be spent. So that means my wife and I, how do we handle that so it doesn't kill our marriage? This thing about spending money, I say easily. She can veto anything I want to buy. And guess what's the other side of that coin? I can veto anything she wants to buy. Now, fortunately, my wife's a very frugal person. So I pretty much try to approve everything she wants to buy. So how does that impact her in our marriage? So when I want to buy some more toys, the words are interchangeable for a lot of men. When I want to buy some more tools, when I already have plenty of them, what does she say? Well, if you really want them, okay. Because when she wants to buy another pair of shoes, how many pairs of shoes does a person need? See, I'm thinking I need a pair of shoes to wear to school. I need a pair of shoes to wear to ball games. And then I need a pair of shoes to work around the house. 3 pairs enough for me. What does a girl need? She needs 3 of them just won't do it, will it, Kara? Because different outfits require different kinds of shoes. I don't know who messed with your head, Karis, to make you girls think like that, but it must be a guy who's getting rich selling shoes to women. It's like, look, Tom, it's just the way it is. Just go buy her a new pair of shoes because she needs them. And just be generous with her. But the point is that we both know that either one of us can veto the spending of money because we don't think it's a good idea. Does this surprise anyone? The third marriage killer on page 375 is selfishness. When I got married, I stood in front of a whole crowd of people and I said, what? What did I say I was going to do? I'd take this woman to be my lawfully wedded wife. I expect her to wait on me hand and foot and fit into my schedule and do everything my way. Does anyone say that in their vow? What do all the wedding vows say? I pledge myself to make them happy, to serve their needs, to look out for their interest. I mean, isn't that what it's all about? Well, if that's the pledge you make when you get married, then follow through and keep your word. And then just simply say, hey, being married means I make this person's wishes more important than mine. And that's just the way it is. And if you start being selfish, you're gonna kill the marriage relationship. On page 376, unhealthy relationships with in-laws. Okay, don't tell in-law jokes. They're inappropriate. I don't know why people like to make fun of their in-laws. Well, it's because they're so different than my family. Well, then why don't you make fun of your own family instead of the in-laws? Oh, well, because that's kind of sensitive with me. Well, don't you think it's sensitive with your spouse to make fun of their relatives? Come on, just simply say, hey, I'm going to do everything I can to build healthy relationships with my in-laws, with my father-in-law, with my mother-in-law. Oh, my grandchildren come over and they go, Poppy, we're going to play Shanghai. Anyone know what that is? Some kind of card game where you have to get 3 of a kind and then 4 in a row and all this different stuff. None of you play Shanghai. Well, my grandchildren say, we're going to play Shanghai, Poppy. You're going to play with us? And I say, nope. I played all my Shanghai when your great-grandmother was alive. They go, what? I said, when I went to Nina's house, her mother always wanted to play Shanghai. And I played the game because my mother-in-law wanted to play it. It was a dumb game then. It's a dumb game now. But that didn't have anything to do with it. I was building a healthy relationship with my mother-in-law. But now that I don't have to build a relationship with my mother-in-law, I don't play Shanghai anymore. Now, sometimes I'll watch them play Shanghai just to be in the room with them, but I just don't care for the game. So it's just like what you basically say is, if unhealthy relationships can kill a marriage, then look for ways to make the relationship with your in-laws healthy, which means you just fit into their way of doing things. Unrealistic expectations can kill a marriage. Coming into a marriage, you probably ought to, if you're engaged or if you're thinking about marriage, you ought to share with your potential future spouse some of the expectations you have based on your own upbringing or your own thinking or the things that you liked that you grew up with or things you didn't like. Share some of those expectations. Space invaders, people getting in each other's space. Does everybody need a little space of their own? I built a garage and I purposely built it with a second story above the garage because I knew my wife would fill the downstairs part up with stuff. But I thought if you have to climb the stairs to get to the second floor would be mine. And anytime I talk to my dear wife about her space and my space, she goes, Tom, why do you talk that way? It just hurts. She goes, it's our space. Everything's our space. Okay, guys, now let me tell you something. See, when you establish a home, that becomes the wife's nest, okay? It's her nest. It's your home, but it's her nest. So you defer to what she wants to put in the nest and how she wants to arrange it. But when she says, it's our space, what that really means is it's her space. And you need to fit in. I found a couple of spaces where she doesn't want to go. Out in the barn, in the trunk of my car, in the back of my pickup that has a cover on it. So I have some spaces that I call my own because she doesn't go there. But any space in our world where she goes, that becomes her space. And you can't be arguing with her about it because it'll damage the relationship. Just recognize that's just the way it is. I read a book that talked about that when a woman gets married, she goes into nesting mode, building a nest for her family. And you just have to deal with that and let that happen. Sexual frustration with partners. Just read books on human sexuality. There's lots of Christians that have written books on sexual relationships today. And the best thing you can do is just read those books together and then talk through what the book says with each other. A business collapse or a business success, either one can kill a marriage. If it collapses, you can fall apart and not be responsive to your partner. Or if it's successful, you can get so busy you're not responsive to your partner. Getting married too young. Now see, I say, well, what's too young? Well, here's what, when I look at that concept of getting married too young, I know some people who, I don't know what their age was when they got married, but 10 years into their marriage, here's what you'll hear people who got married too young say. I never got a chance to go to college because I got married. And now I want to go to college and earn my degree. So I'm going to put the family second and make getting my college degree first. Now, what should this person have done if a college degree was that important to them? They should have waited about getting married till after they got their college degree. You follow what happens? And if they get to that place later in life and say, I wish I would have earned a college degree, then I'm going to say, well, just keep wishing, and maybe someday when your kids are grown, you'll get a chance to go back to school. And it could be that you'll be in your late 40s before you get that master's degree, or even to get that bachelor's degree, but it's better to keep your family intact than earn a college degree. The Bible doesn't say a lot about the college degree, but it does say a lot about family and about maintaining family relationships. Page 377. I mean, this isn't surprising, is it? Alcohol, substance abuse, pornography, gambling, and other addictions will kill a marriage. And I think that's pretty obvious, isn't it? That any of those things can kill a marriage. Whoa. Page number 454. I've always thought, page 378, number 454. I've always thought a man should be willing to work and sacrifice to reach his goals. Now you're saying to cool the passion and postpone the dream. That isn't the way I was taught. There's nothing wrong with having a passion and a dream. It should, however, be kept in balance with other valuable components of your life, your family, and your relationship with God being chief among them. Once I came to work at Calvary, back in 1980, I discovered that I loved teaching here. And I also discovered that I wanted to get a doctor's degree to go along with being a college professor. So I went back to school and started working on my doctor's degree. And all of a sudden, one of my children said to me, the year I was supposed to graduate, she said, Dad, it's no big deal that I'm getting a high school diploma this year. You're about to get a doctor's degree. And it was like, she goes, that really makes a high school diploma look like nothing. And I said, I don't think I'm going to get my doctor's degree this year. She goes, what? I said, I think we're going to focus on you graduating from high school this year, and then I'll just keep signing up as a continuing student, and after we get you out of high school and get you into college, then I'll go back and start working on it again. I just kind of postponed it for a year because I could sense that that was minimizing, I don't know why, but in her head, it was minimizing the worth of her high school diploma for her father to be getting a doctor's degree. So I just postponed it till after she was graduated and on her way to college. And then when she was in college, it didn't matter to her that I was working on a PhD. You follow what happens? Sometimes you have to make decisions that are in the best interest of your family. In fact, there's earning a doctor's degree, or actually you don't earn it. Every other degree you earn. A doctor's degree, you do all the work, and then a committee decides whether or not you get a degree. They vote to either give you one or not give you one. And I was getting pretty tired of the process of jumping around, making all the committee members happy. And I finally said to my wife, I said, you know what, Nina, I think I'll just quit this whole process. I mean, I don't have to have a doctor's degree for what I do at Calvary. A master's degree with all of these credits, that would be sufficient. I've got the credentials and I've got the courses behind me to support what I'm doing. It doesn't matter whether I have the degree after my name. And I still remember my wife said, Tom, I've put up with your mess in your office with all those papers strung all over for so long that I want something to show for it. And I go, what? She goes, I want something to show for it. And I said, like what? She said, like a doctor's degree diploma that I can hang on the wall. I'm going, whoa, I didn't know it was that important to you. She said, yes, it's important to me that you finish this thing. I'm going, okay, then I guess I'll go over there and put up with the grief and crack down and do the work that I need to do to finish it up. So it worked both ways. I postponed it because of one family member's thinking, and then I went ahead and wrapped it up no matter how much grief they were giving me, because another family member felt differently about it. It's just like your family becomes a significant part of all the stuff you're doing in life. 463, question 463. I know for the sake, on page 386, I know for the sake of my marriage and family, I should not overcommit myself. But we attend a church that schedules activities and events 6 or 7 nights a week. My husband and I are asked and expected to accept leadership in many of these functions. Frankly, I feel guilty when I don't do what my pastor asks of me. As a result, we have very little time together as a family. How do we accommodate these competing needs? And Dr. Dobson says, I can personally identify with your dilemma. Shirley and I went through a similar era in the first decade of our marriage. At that time, I believed I was obligated as a young Christian to accept anything asked of me by my church. And then he talks about all the things he did. Gradually, on page 387, gradually I came to understand that the Lord wanted me to use good judgment and common sense in the things I agreed to, even if they involved very worthwhile causes. There will always be more good things to do than one man or woman can get done. I realized I needed to maintain a healthy balance between Christian duty, work responsibilities, recreation, social obligations, and meaningful family life. And that's what you have to do. You just have to see. Here's what I concluded. It wasn't like all these people, all these youth pastors, were trying to destroy my family. The truth is, my family was important to them because it wasn't their family, it was my family. What they wanted was for me to come and help them help their teenagers become all that God wanted the teenagers to be. So they were just looking at me as a resource to help them nurture and disciple their teens. You follow that? They weren't thinking about my family. And if I would have said, what about my family? They would say, that's your responsibility. And they would be right. It was my responsibility. It's not my pastor's responsibility to look out for my family. It's my responsibility. So I have to make those decisions that are in the best interest of my family because nobody else will. That's a pretty tough thing, isn't it? And that means I will sometimes say no to doing good things. I'll say no even to my pastor when he asks me to do something. I remember one time I said to my pastor, he asked me to do something, and I said, you know what? I said, there's a lot of men in this church who are qualified to serve on this church board. My contribution to this church is being a Sunday school teacher. I believe that's what God wants me to do. If I start taking away time during the week to come to board meetings, that would take away time that I need to spend doing something else. So you need to ask one of those other qualified men in church to serve on the board. But Tom, you would make such a valuable contribution. You understand? They'll do everything they can to talk you in to rearranging your priorities. And you just have to be the person who says, I'm the only one that's looking out for my family's interest, and I'm the only one that can decide before God how He wants me to spend my time. And just like money, time spent one place means it's time you can't spend someplace else. And you just have to make those decisions and then realize that not everyone is going to like the choices you make.
If you don't have a family yet, how do you differentiate between using time for yourself that becomes selfish and prioritizing other things?
And can you see where it'd be easier for them to say, well, Tom's just being selfish about it?
Well, I'm saying if you don't have a family,
if you don't have a family,
how can you do?
Okay.
How can
see,
you
now everybody has a family.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have a husband and children, but you have a father and a mother and siblings. And if you get so busy in ministry that you can't spend the time that God wants you to spend with your family, or even extended family, aunts and uncles or grandparents, then you're too busy. You're overcommitted. You see what can happen? And if you're saying yes to so many things as a single person, that you're showing up to do something and you're a little touchy and edgy because you're what? Overcommitted? Then guess what? You need to start putting in your calendar time to relax with God and maintain my mental and spiritual equilibrium. And for some single people, that means they need to get in their car and go for a drive. One of the things I enjoyed about taking my family over Christmas and holidays and Thanksgiving, those from Peoria all the way to Kansas City and down to Oklahoma, is we got in the car and we got away from Peoria, and if the phone rang in Peoria, we weren't there to answer it. And that was before cell phones. But let me tell you what, if I have a cell phone, I do have a cell phone. I just don't carry it every place with me. It stays in the car. I only use it when I'm in the car. And I get in there and I don't even check to see if somebody called me. And if someone says, hey, I called you on your cell phone, I said, well, if you didn't get a hold of me, you should have kept trying until you caught me when I was in my car. Well, why don't you take it in the house so we can call you there? Because I don't want it in the house. And sometimes at home, if we're busy, I don't answer the phone when it rings. You go, what? When I used to be on campus with an office, a student would come in to see me and we'd be talking away and the phone would ring. And they would say, are you going to get that? And I said, no, you were here first. And then eventually somebody would say, but what if it's an emergency? I said, like what? They said, well, what if somebody died? I said, so is my picking up the phone going to bring them back to life? Is it? No. What if somebody's in the hospital? Will my picking up the phone make them get well? No. I mean, we're not going to be here for the rest of the day. We're going to be here for another 15 or 20 or 30 minutes, and when our conversation's ended, then I can call back and find out what somebody wants if they left a message. You follow what's going on? I just don't let the world I live in control my life. I have to make the decision that my family was a gift from God, my wife and my children, and they have to be a priority, and I'm the only one watching out for that on this earth. I mean, God is watching out for them, but on this earth, I'm the appointed person to guard that time. And I found that little book, writing all that stuff in there, and even my daughters. I'd say, girls, nobody in the world writes in this book except me and you two girls and your mother. And you can, my book's always on the dresser when I'm not going someplace, and if something's coming up, just come in and write your name in my book and write down what it is and tell me what time I need to be where. And they thought that was so cool that they had the power to do that. You know, that empowered them, because I had read all these books about how people get so immersed in ministry and doing so many things for so many people that their family gets overlooked. Okay. Any other comments or questions? And I think, okay, married people just have one more dimension to take care of. And married people with children have another dimension to take care of. When you're single, you still have to make those decisions. But if people are trying to talk you out of taking care of your family relationships and your personal needs, they'll probably say you're just being selfish. And what you probably ought to say back to them is, what I think is that you're being selfish because you're not being considerate of my needs that you don't know anything about. You just want my talents and abilities to help you do something that you have in mind. You just want me. I mean, have you ever heard this saying? If you find a good horse, you ride him to death, you work him to death. And I've concluded that that's the world we live in. Nobody does it intentionally. They just keep piling it on. Oh, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. And the answer is yes, I can do it, but will I do it? No. I can't do that anymore. I mean, I used to love to go to Pennsylvania and teach classes in the summertime as a visiting professor at a university up there. But then our children packed up and went to Russia as missionaries, and they were only going to be home every year during the summer when I normally would go to Pennsylvania to teach. So what do you think that means? What do I have to tell the people in Pennsylvania? I can't teach for you anymore because my family is only home for 2 months out of the summer, and that's the time when I teach up here, so I have to stay home so I can spend time with my children and grandchildren. Now, can you see some of my friends thinking, well, that's not a good career move. That's not going to serve you well. And I'm thinking, you don't understand. I know what God wants me to do, so I just, by God's grace, do it. Okay, let's move on. That was 463, 467. Yeah, good. We're going to get this book done. There are those who think your position on abortion is extreme because you wouldn't even permit it in cases of incest, rape, or when the child is defective. How do you justify such a position? And Dr. Dobson says, only in rare instances when the life of the mother is literally at stake do I feel we have the moral authority to destroy a developing fetus. Surely the Lord does not look upon the baby inside the uterus with any less love and concern than one who enters the world a few minutes later. The only difference between them is that one can be seen and the other cannot. If that premise can be accepted, then it's equally immoral to kill either those born or those yet to be born. Physical and intellectual health and the nature of conception are irrelevant to the issue. And basically what he's talking about is this child inside this mother's womb is a creation of God's handiwork and needs to be respected. And not looking for ways. It's kind of like when I used to talk to teenagers about honoring and obeying your parents. Instead of saying, yeah, that's a good idea, let's do it, that'll be pleasing to God, they would say, well, but what if your parents told you to go to the store and steal some groceries? You understand? They want to bring up hypothetical cases, and they're called hypothetical because there wasn't one person in that classroom whose parents had ever told them to go steal groceries. So they're hypothetical situations that they want to discuss to excuse themselves from God's directive. Now, have I ever met someone whose parents told them to steal? Yes, I have. And so what do you say? Well, obey your parents. Well, I mean, what happened when they told the apostles that you're no longer to preach in this name of Jesus? I have to do what? I must obey God rather than men. And if your parents tell you to do something that goes directly contrary to what God says to do, you have no choice. You obey God rather than men, whether it's your parents or not. Because God takes priority. And so we have to work out a creative way to get around that. But shame on those parents. By the way, do you know why some parents would encourage their kids to steal things instead of go to steal it themselves?
So they don't get in trouble.
What?
So they don't get in trouble.
Okay, I couldn't believe it when I learned this years ago. If the child gets caught stealing, he doesn't have any serious consequences because he's a minor. If the adult gets caught stealing, he goes to jail. So the adult puts his child out front to steal the stuff, so the child will only have to have it on it. And in fact, when the child turns, I think it's 18 or something, when he turns 18, any wrong he's done is erased from his record. But if you take a child at 12 and teach him how to steal, and he becomes your Pac-Man for stolen stuff, by the time he's 18, what habit has he developed in life? So even though the legal system wipes the slate clean, at the age of 18 years and 1 day, he starts reestablishing another one as an adult. And I just think, why would people do that? And again, it's just selfishness. And that's the same with abortion. It's just selfishness. Thinking more of yourself than of the unborn child. Number 469. Why is there such concern about the euthanasia movement? If a sick elderly person wants to die with dignity, I don't see why that should threaten anybody. Why shouldn't we just permit a quiet suicide when the quality of life is no longer there? Why shouldn't we just say, just go ahead and kill yourself? I mean, I've been to the nursing home to visit some people, and they've said, I don't know why I'm still here, Brother Tom. I wish I was in heaven. I said, I know you do, and I know you're in pain, but for some reason, God has left you here. Do you know what that reason is? Well, maybe it's just to talk to some of these nurses who come in to see me about the Lord Jesus. I said, there you go. Is it worth putting up with a little pain for a few more months if you have an opportunity to lead somebody to Christ? Oh, she said, that's a pleasant thought. I said, there you go. Get some pleasant thoughts in your head, and it'll help you deal with the pain in your body. But we don't decide when we're born, right? That's in God's hands. We don't decide when we die. That's in God's hands. We let Him take care of that kind of thing. 473. Homosexual activists claim their lifestyle should be sanctioned, protected, and granted special rights by society. Their rationale is that since their sexual nature is inherited, it's involuntary and therefore should be considered morally neutral. Would you critique this stance? And Dr. Dobson says, what if it could be demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that homosexuality is genetic? We would still want to know, so what? The homosexual activist community would have us believe that because their behavior is genetically programmed and beyond their control, it's morally defensible. That's not supportable. Most men have inherited a lust for women. What's he say next? Their natural tendency is to have sex with as many beautiful girls as possible, both before marriage and after. Abstinence before marriage and monogamy afterward are accomplished by discipline and commitment. If men did what they are genetically programmed to do, they would be sexually promiscuous from about 14 years of age onward. Would that make such behavior any less immoral? Of course not. Do you like that parallel? I just think he's really hit a home run in terms of addressing this issue. If the Bible says something's wrong, it doesn't matter what kind of inclination you come into the world with. I mean, today they've done enough research to determine that some people have a genetic predisposition to addiction to alcohol. And Dr. Dobson in his book talks about that. The best way to avoid that addiction is never touch the stuff in the first place. Just stay away from it. But so what? Even if you're born with an addictive personality and an addictive gene in your body, does that say that, okay, so it's wrong for everybody else to be drunk, but it's not wrong for you to be that way because that's the way God made you? No. I mean, what the Bible says is wrong is wrong. And then on page 400, Dr. Dobson talks about the pedophile could claim that he's inherited his lust for children. That's pretty sick, isn't it? I mean, just look at this stuff rationally and say, I don't know what's going on, except I've tried to analyze. And Dr. Dobson on page 403 gives a whole bunch of scriptures. Because question 475 says this, I heard a theologian say that the Bible does not condemn homosexual behavior, and that those who say it does are nothing more than right-wing fundamentalist homophobes. What do you think Scripture says on the subject? And he doesn't tell him what he thinks. He just quotes a whole bunch of scriptures here and says, this is what the Bible says about it on page 403 and page 404. And after you've read those scriptures, what do you conclude? That it's clear in Scripture that homosexuality is wrong. So what's our problem? That should settle it. I don't understand. I don't understand where this stuff is coming from. And then I said to my wife, maybe I do. Because Christians take a stand against okay, years ago, Christians took a stand against open marriage because the Bible teaches monogamy. And the people who are promoting open marriages actually called us selfish because we should be willing to share our lovely wives with other men in the world and not be so possessive and selfish. And I thought, you know what it is? The general population, even if they don't embrace some particular notion, if the Christians take a stand that that's wrong, they want to take the other side just because they're so anti-Christian in their thinking. So you think, that's just what happens. It happens in the area of child discipline. It happens in all kinds of areas. In the area of raising children, taking children to church. I mean, there's all kinds of areas where the world just jumps on a bandwagon because they're anti-Christian. And you say, and that's the kind of world I live in, I just need to adjust to it. Okay, we'll stop here, and it looks like we're far enough along where we'll be able to finish this book on Friday.